Now, most people are familiar with Theodore Roosevelt, the president, but how many are familiar with Theodore Roosevelt, the rancher? Yes, Roosevelt owned and operated a ranch in North Dakota from 1883 to 1887. Now, Teddy was certainly not the typical rancher of the 1880s, but he did experience the economic realities and way of life that every other rancher experienced. In 1883, at the age of 25, Teddy went out to the badlands of North Dakota to hunt buffalo. And he became convinced that owning a ranch out there would be a good investment. Here is how Teddy himself described it in his autobiography. Quote, "After a buffalo hunt with my original friend Joe Ferris, I entered into a partnership with William Merrifield and Sylvain Ferris, and we started a cow ranch with the Maltese Cross brand," unquote. Now, Edmund Morris gives a few more facts. He says that in the conversation, Teddy asked the gentleman, well, how much would it cost to start a ranch? And they replied, well, about $40,000 if you want to do it right, but you'd need about a third of it down. So Teddy Roosevelt whips out his checkbook, writes a check for $14,000 and hands it over to him and says, get going. That's the kind of guy that Teddy was. In June of 1884, he gave Ferris and Merrifield another $26,000 to purchase another 1,000 head of cattle. Now, in the summer of 1885, Roosevelt decided to buy an extra 1,500 head of cattle. Now, this latest purchase, amounting to $39,000, raised his total investment in the cattle business in North Dakota to $85,000. On December 2nd, 1886, Roosevelt in London married his childhood friend Edith Caro. Meanwhile, devastation was happening and his cows were dying. To demonstrate how risky a financial proposition a ranch in the badlands of western North Dakota could be, on July 4th of 1886, the temperature reached 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, 6 months later, on New Year's Day, 1887, the temperature was minus 41. Tens of thousands of cattle died in the Badlands in the winter of 86 and 87, around 80% of the entire cattle population. Edmund Morris describes the situation Roosevelt faced. Quote, "Not until the 4th of April was Roosevelt free to go west and find out exactly how poor he was." He already had a fairly accurate idea, or rather Edith had. That level-headed lady knew that her husband, whatever his other talents, was a financial imbecile, unquote. Roosevelt lost about 65% of his cattle and more than half of his $85,000 investment. While Roosevelt and many other ranchers lost a lot of money in 1887, Theodore Roosevelt, the man, and indeed the whole nation, gained immeasurably. Of all the enduring legacies of Theodore Roosevelt, one of the greatest is his conservation of the land and natural resources of our country. Quote, "Conservation increasingly became one of Roosevelt's main concerns. After becoming president in 1901, Roosevelt used his authority to protect wildlife and public lands by creating the United States Forest Service and establishing 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks, and 18 national monuments by enabling the 1906 American Antiquities Act. During his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt protected approximately 230 million acres of public land," unquote. That according to the National Park Service website. All this happened because Roosevelt had been transformed by his experience as a rancher in North Dakota, in spite of his financial losses. Garrett Hardin writes in The Tragedy of the Commons of how an individual is likely to despoil common land because he doesn't feel that it's going to cost him anything personally, in spite of the cost to everyone publicly and as a whole. Roosevelt acted in just the opposite way. Benjamin Redekop writes, quote, "He was influential on conservationism, at least in part, because he told a story about nature and our place in it that both resonated with his own character and actions and appealed to a population that in itself had begun to experience the wonders as well as the limitations of American natural resources," unquote.